Welcome to How Did We Get Here educational program, sponsored and presented by the High Point Historical Society and the High Point Museum. I'm Van Voorhees Trivet, president of the High Point Historical Society. How Did We Get Here is an educational experience that takes a current topic, exploring it through the progression in time and how it might tie to High Point and our surrounding community history. Let's go over some ground rules first. Our speaker will present first, then we'll follow with question and answers. Please use the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. Teresa Laughlin will lead the question and answer session. If by chance your question's not answered, we will answer your questions directly in an email. Today, we're going to learn about the civic work of Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown. Leading our exploration today is Lacey Wilson, site manager of the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. The Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum is North Carolina's first and only official state historical site to honor an African American and a woman. The site is the former Palmer Memorial Institute, an African American preparatory school established by Dr. Brown in 1902. The site was opened to the public in 1987. Their mission is to preserve and interpret the history and cultural legacy of Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown, the Palmer Memorial Institute, and African American education. Lacey, we welcome you and thank you for leading us on this exploration.
Thank you, Van. I'm excited to be here. All right, so we'll dive right in here. Everyone can see my screen. So I did want to start off with just sort of placing the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum in the school that is. You touched on it a bit briefly, but what we're looking at here is the visitor center for our site, and we encourage you to come out and visit if the weather's good. We are doing outdoor tours 3 times a day on days that we are open. Please come out and visit us. We'd love to tell you more about this work with things in front of you. So what we're looking at now is Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown. As mentioned, she is an educator, she's an advocate, and I often think of her as someone who advocated for her students while they are students at the Palmer Memorial Institute, as well as beyond that. But starting with the school, she builds it and fundraises for it beginning in 1902, and it was a preparatory private boarding school. It cost money to come here, and this school graduated over 2,000 students over its history. And the students learned about a variety of things. There were the opportunity to learn about art, liberal arts, agricultural sciences, mechanical sciences, domesticated work, all sorts of learning occurred at this school, which is what makes it so special. And also what the former students, our current alumni, really claim as the beginning of them becoming adults, of them being able to make decisions for themselves. And that's what we're looking at here with Charlotte in all of these pictures. She very much modeled for her students the kind of middle class, classy, things that education, a good education can get you. She was born in Henderson, North Carolina, but grew up primarily in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So she often advertised the school as a little bit of Massachusetts in North Carolina. The school began as a blacksmith's shed and grew even further to the far more than the 40 acres that we can see today. We can see a lot of these students here visiting the site and visiting the school and interacting with it as students, and really just sort of beginning their lives here. This is the Palmer Memorial building that we're looking at right now, which is this is actually Kimball Hall. This is the Palmer Memorial building, which you can see here, and actually where most of the classes would have taken place. If you would like to see more of it, we actually will be having an exhibit come up digital exhibit come up pretty soon that allows you to explore more of the history of that space. As you can see, it was advertised in newspapers, and it did cost money to get there, and the money would go toward these students and the work that they would end up doing. And the students came from all over. We had a lot of North Carolinian residents, Guilford County residents who would come and go to the school to get their education. We also have a lot of New Yorkers, Texans. Several international students would come and visit the site and would attend the school and would think about their time here and as the beginning. really a large amount of globalization that you can see here at this school through all of these students. And as I said, they're learning all sorts of things. Learning the first African-American history courses in Guilford County were actually taught here at this school here. And it had a very large farm. A very large farm that grew food for the students and also allowed for the students to sell the food as they're going forth as well. One of the ways that the fundraising occurred at this school was through Sedalia singers. A lot of music was being sung. Sedalia singers were like a jubilee akin to the Fisk singers. And they would go up and down the East Coast performing Negro spirituals, hymns, showing off what you could get when you actually attended this school and participated, and the students' successes afterwards. And they performed even at the White House during the FDR administration, which is very notable for a segregated South. She was very, Dr. Brown was very interested in the domesticated arts. She wrote the book, The Correct Thing to Do, to Say, to Wear, which we sell, which instructs students and young people how they should approach their lives and how they should present themselves in a very polite way, in the etiquette that that requires, as well as the things you can get out of being able to, having all those options open once you have that etiquette within you and you're using it. Very large campus, very focused on family style and having everyone be very close to each other. When you come visit the site, you'll see the boys and girls side of campus, but they were always family style dinners that would occur that you can see pictures of here. We have Elliott Hall, which was the boys' campus that was built. And this is Canary Cottage, Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown's home that was built on campus to her specifications. We have a digital tour about that on our website as well, which you can use to go and explore that space. Kimball Hall again, and she's known for being she's also very much someone who enjoyed her time here and was interacting with her students. So we can see a lot of the fun that would occur on campus as well as the athleticism. There were, the students had a basketball team, a very well-known baseball team in 1926, I believe. You can see the football team as well. But as I mentioned, as we started, I didn't want to give you a bit of the school, but I did want to dive further into her civic work to start off with. So she's an advocate, as I mentioned, for her students before, while they are students, as well as after. And you can see a lot of that in the organizations that she's involved in, starting and putting together here in Sedalia, in North Carolina, and nationally, all connecting with larger conversations happening with politics in the United States. So locally, the Sedalia Homeowners Association was an organization that she was heavily involved in, helping to get a lot of Black residents ownership of land here, which we all know is very important in terms of generational wealth, as well as being able to lift themselves up and be able to attend the schools if they aren't further dealing with rent and various taxes. So that's an important thing that she's doing here locally in Sedalia, as well as just being involved with the schools here. So as a private Black boarding school, primarily like junior high into high school are the ages that it had for the most of the time that it's here. She was also involved with helping to put together the elementary school that sits directly on the other side of us today. That school, helping to put that elementary school here in this area. She started the school after she had come down as a teacher for an American Missionary Association school that existed here. And after teaching for about a year, the AMA closed that school, and the community came to her to ask her to continue to teach their kids, because they knew how useful it was and what a benefit that was to their children. And so after a great deal of fundraising, that's when the school really began. So you can see a lot of the ways that she's supporting the area of Sedalia and the Black residents of Sedalia through the school, through providing education and keeping things going here as well. But in terms of her political activism, of which there's many, I could go on and on about the various things that she's involved in, but I wanted to focus in primarily on the 19th Amendment that celebrated its 100th anniversary just last year. So as we know that it took a while when the United States first began. It was not democratically available to everyone, and it took a while for women to get the right to vote. And we also know that when women got the right to vote, that wasn't available to all women. It took longer for Black women, it took longer for other women of color and Native women. There's a lot of variety of stories here in terms of getting the right to vote and making that available and keeping that for them. But in terms of Charlotte's particular point, we can see a lot of the ways that she's involved. So she's going to found the North Carolina Federation of Negro Women's Clubs, which connects all of the Black women's clubs in North Carolina. Now, Black women's clubs are very politically active in terms of caring for their communities, working on education, politics, and really filling in a lot of ways in which that the government was not due to Jim Crow and a variety of segregationist practices that were going on at the time. So when in connecting all of those organizations throughout the state, she's able to be involved. That organization is connecting and sharing information widely. So that's just to set the scene there. And as the ratification of the 19th Amendment is going through, their plan is put in place by this organization to send out information about how Black women can register to vote and be involved in the political process. We have no evidence that Dr. Charlotte was primarily involved at this time, but we do know that she founds the organization and is involved on some level in terms of membership and leadership on some level, but we don't have any direct things. But we can see from her founding this organization as her being involved, and she's active in terms of giving speeches about the importance of all women getting the right to vote and all Black people getting the right to vote. That is something we can see her talking about in very specific, savvy ways, because it's also important to remember, starting with the school, that she has this school here, and she's made a lot of connections in the South and in the North that protects these students, and she doesn't want to lose or have that be threatened at any point. So she's very savvy with how she addresses her activism as well. This organization is going to send out a lot of organization. It's going to send out a lot of structure on how Black women will be able to get the right to vote. They will go, there will be specific dates in which it is suggested that these Black women will go and attempt to register. There will be information given out on how to pass as much information they can do for passing literacy tests. They don't know 100% on all of them, but they can make educated guesses, and they can be involved to try to set themselves up for it. They are very involved. The organization will also send out information to churches to have those ministers and religious leaders talk about the importance of all women being able to vote, and have that be on the pulpit, and having other organizations like women's clubs or other local Black organizations tell these stories and be involved and spread this information so that it will be able to be sent to as many Black women as possible so they can actually register to vote. What I love about this story and why I'm always excited to tell it is when we think about women getting the right to vote, we often exclude a lot of other women who did not immediately get the right to vote, but we also exclude stories like this in which you can see women of color actively involved with trying to get as many of them to be able to register to vote and be involved in this process from the beginning, all throughout the time that the United States history. And that's an important thing for us always to keep in mind, that advocacy continues even at the beginning and even when it's particularly hard. So there will be a lot of people, a lot of men who are involved in voting registration, who are taken aback and shocked by the amount of Black women who will come forth to register to vote on the two particular Saturdays that they had designated for this. Which I always find really amazing. When you can look at the newspaper articles and reports of that, you can see that both political parties are blaming the other for this particular instance, that the other was trying to rile up the Black women. It does not occur to them that Black women might have wanted to vote unrelated to a particular political party's influence, which I always find very fascinating. Another important part of her political advocacy that we can see a bit more is the importance of education for Black women across the United States. So the picture that we see on the left with the three women, we see the three B's of education. We have Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown in the middle, we have Nanny Burroughs on the left, and Mary McLeod Bethune on the right. Mary McLeod Bethune might be the most notable name of the three of them, but they're all Black women educators involved in suffrage, involved in advocacy, University, all across the East Coast, Mary McLeod Bethune in Florida, I believe, and Nanny Burroughs up in DC, all doing a lot of work organizationally, nationally, to support as much Black education as they can, as well as being involved in the political scene as well. So in the same vein, I often talk about the national names that we'll hear on the site. If we were giving tours at Canary Cottage, I would tell you about sitting at that same table with her at her dining room table, or names like Eleanor Roosevelt, Langston Hughes, Mary McLeod Bethune, Nanny Burroughs, various national names that you can see and hear about in your studies of American history in terms of the struggle for equal rights and civil rights. But Charlotte is such a localized example of being involved in all of these things, which is why it's important to keep a close eye on your local history in that very same sense, in terms of seeing what stories that come up that will still relate to these larger national stories. Speaking of going back to the voters, what we can see here is on the left is a very notable example of the savviness that's necessary when it comes to being a Black woman running a school who is involved in voting rights for all people, but especially for Black women. This is an article that was, this was an article or a letter that was published in the Greensboro newspaper, claiming to be from the Colored Women's Rights Association, an organization that did not exist, but is assumed to be the North Carolina Negro Women, North Carolina Federation of Negro Women's Clubs. The article, the letter that was claimed to be passed around all across the county, all across the state, was claiming to be register as many Black women as possible. The Democrats are gonna, the Republicans are gonna support them if you can't. It's a very aggressive letter that is spread across a variety of places, spread across and intended to, we believe, and Charlotte also believed, intended to cause trouble around the voting rights in the 19th Amendment, intending to put her in danger, intended to put a lot of Black women who were involved in this organization in danger, and intended to paint her as far more radical than she was coming across and was actively working toward. So this is an article that gets assumed to be written by her, and is something that she disavows. Publicly, intentionally. And we know that she disavows it because of the danger that this would have put her and put her finances, as well as the school where these students are learning and trying to better themselves. It's really interesting if you get a chance to look further and closer at that particular letter and comparing it to her other writings, it doesn't quite gel in the same way, which is why she and a lot of scholars believe that she didn't write this letter, but someone else did, intending to criminalize her in some way and put more of an eye on her activities. An important thing that I like to get into toward the end of this, because I think I have one more slide of just questions after it, is the importance of her work with interracial cooperation organizations. She's working, she is the head of a school here in the South, a private boarding school. She has a lot of funding coming from Northerners, and she has a lot of connections with educators here in the South, white and Black, in both places. But being involved with interracial cooperation organizations here in the South was very crucial for her, being able to do more of her advocacy. She's able to work with Black women and white women who are working together to try to make changes. And those conversations, being able to sit down and have those conversations about how to best work together and things they want to fix, is a learning opportunity for everyone involved. The white women are learning about things that they didn't realize, things that they could have been more involved in. A prime example of this is going to an interracial cooperation meeting in Memphis. Dr. Brown is going to ride a Pullman train. She's going to get a sleeping car train. She paid for the ticket was paid for, and that's where she intends to go. And on her way there, she is accosted by several white men who want her to go back to the smoking car train. We are in Jim Crow times, and with segregation, that is the way that these rules are supposed to be implemented. And she either has to go to the smoking car train or she's going to be thrown off the train. So she gathers her things, her safeties are concerned, so she's going to go back, but she's humiliated and she's angry. And she's especially angry at all these white women she's passing on the train who did not step up to help her in this scenario. And so when she actually gets to the conference, after riding the rest, I believe, in the smoking car, when as going over there, she's going to be allowed to give a speech. She's going to be encouraged to give a speech, giving her perspective. She was coming to give a speech to this conference anyway. She will straight up call them out for not stepping up in this scenario. It's important that they continue to step up to each other. How much cooperation are they really giving each other if they're not stepping up in these individual scenarios? Is one of something that I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but this is something that she's concerned with in these organizations. Like, she knows that the powers that these conversations can have, and it's also important that the people involved know the real stepping up opportunities that they could be involved in. These organizations are going to come out with calling out lynching, calling out KKK marching at Tuskegee in terms of sending more money to Black schools in North Carolina and across the South United States. These are important conversations that are affected local, state, and national history at that time. And these are things that Charlotte's involved in the best of her ability, both in advocating for her students a bit after. And that was the last slide. I may have talked too fast.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Okay, do we have any questions? You'll just type them into the Q&A box for me.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Okay, Lacey, you can probably stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I will.
Get the buttons in the right place.
There we go.
Okay, I do have one question. Why did she settle in the Greensboro area for the school?
So she grows up in Cambridge, and she gets 2 offers in the sort of end of her studies to being certified as a teacher. She gets a call, she gets an offer from Florida, and she gets an offer for Greensboro, North Carolina, Sedalia really. And she is born in Henderson, but spends most of her life in Cambridge. She really feels that God is calling her home to North Carolina, to Sedalia, to teach there. And so once she gets the call and begins teaching in Sedalia, she teaches here for about a year before the AMA, the American Missionary Association, shuts down that school. And the community comes to her and says, we would like you to continue to teach our students. We think you're doing a good job, and we know the power of education. And so she basically settles here, I think, because of the connections that she's made in the last year, and the fact that her connections to North Carolina as well.
All right, and did she have any connection with Maggie Walker of the Richmond, Virginia area?
I'm sure they're running in the same circles at the same time. She's running the school from about 1902 to 1971 and involved in a lot of fundraising for that school. Maggie Walker, off the top of my head, I do not have a specific example of something like that, but I wouldn't be surprised because of the national circles that they're all running in terms of trying to get, trying to work for civil rights at this time. So the connections to Eleanor Roosevelt, the connections to corporations, to advocacy. I'm sure they're connected. Off the top of my head, I don't have a great example, unfortunately.
I have always been fascinated by her ability to skillfully navigate advocating for her students, school, fundraising, and etc. Her activism and for a change. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, the word that always comes to mind when I'm giving a tour is that she's very savvy. She's very well connected and is intentional about the connections that she's trying to make that she knows will give her the most help. So the name of the school, Palmer, comes from the first Wesleyan professor, Wesley University's first woman professor, who was a part of the reason she was able to get her education. That is a name that she essentially campaigns on in the North to get this school in a lot of ways, which gives her a lot of fundraising. And those connections, and she also will intentionally advertise the school with the Booker T. Washington method to a lot of people, including wealthy Northerners, saying this is a space where Black students can gain skills to get jobs, because she knows that people will be interested in sending money for that particular kind of an institution. That said, liberal arts is always a very important part. College prep is very important. Art is very important. All of those are occurring at this school. And the money is still going in ways to intentionally help those schools in all those ways. Yeah, and her advocacy, as I keep saying, it spans so broad and is so local. Like being able to be, to run a school, to fundraise for that school essentially at all hours, to connect with educators across the country to find the best ways to educate these students, to get teachers for these students, to get, to help the students grow and realize their own power. Students built a good amount of these buildings on our site, including our former gym, because they wanted a gym on campus. And so they came to her and said they wanted a gym, and she gave them some resources to put one together. And she very much sees, I would say, her advocacy as something that is intentionally building upon the work of already educating these students in terms of connecting the girls to women's clubs, in terms of teaching the boys how to best, giving them skills, giving them entrepreneurial skills in particular. A grant that we got 2 years ago for our tea house that will hopefully be implemented soon has to do with the entrepreneurial skills that school store, the tea house, essentially had and gave young Black boys at this school, being able to work a system like that and be able to set prices and market and get those skills, which are so necessary at any particular time. There's so much there. It's so rich, the history and the advocacy that she's doing both as for students and after. If you go back on our social media, you will find a quote in which she's directly calling out criminal justice reform last summer, which is such a present issue in today, but was also very present at the time. We can see her talking about and giving speeches about immigration. We can see her talking about housing and food and all these things that politically are so important to us today that she was advocating for before. I would argue she's ahead of her time in terms of being able to make all of these connections and well as focus them into creating this school and creating a space where the students could flourish as well as they did.
Can you speak more about the etiquette at the school? What kind of things were the students learning and why?
They're learning all sorts of things. So when we think about etiquette, we often think about what fork to use, what spoon to use, ways to dress, ways to present yourself, dates, and how with the length of skirts. It's going to be involved in all of that. And I would encourage, if anyone's interested, to come and pick up the book where you can see directly what she's saying. But we can also see in the way that she's teaching these things and how she's teaching these things, there's a real individualism and collectivism that you can see in these particular actions. I argue that the way she's teaching etiquette is very much her trying to protect these young Black children in a segregated system of the United States, teaching the best way to present themselves in a system that's already segregated and is already stacked against them. Lynching is not uncommon at that time, and it's something that would have been on her mind as well as on the minds of her students. So being able to best present themselves in order to get the goals that they want to accomplish, I would argue, is the crucial point of this etiquette. But as best way to just sort of go forward and present yourself is often the way that I think about it. It's really a lot of uplift. It's in a lot of ways, but it's also very much how to take care of yourself. When we look at the domestic arts classes that are being taught at the school, the girls would spend at one point during these classes, spend about 6 weeks in what is currently Massachusetts Cottage, what was also then called Massachusetts Cottage, this building where they would, for 6 weeks, learn how to do laundry on their own, cook meals on their own, connect with women's clubs, clean, and just learn how to really take care of a household in that space. The real hands-on, everyday, necessary skills that we all use and need to this day, the kinds of work that we're being taught. So it's a real sort of connection, I would say, to being able to present yourself in the right way, as well as the necessary skills to keep yourself in a good situation.
What about her connections with other Black educators at the time? How involved were they with Dr. Brown in the school?
So she is essentially running the school. There are a lot of teachers here. Alumni remember very fondly of the teachers that existed here. And she's very much creating a place for both the students to grow, as I keep mentioning, but also for the teachers. There's a lot of connections here with teachers here at Palmer, connecting with A&T professors, connecting with various North Carolina HBCU professors, because those are the people they're being really socially engaging with as well. So she's involved with connecting with all of those schools. At one point, she is trying to get the school will go through a variety of financial difficulties during its many years. And at one point, she is trying to get, oh God, it's completely lost my mind, the Black Women's HBCU in Greensboro. It's completely lost my mind. He's trying to get that institution to purchase Palmer at one point, which doesn't fully go through.
Someone said Bennett.
Bennett, yes. At one point, she's trying to get Bennett trying to work with Bennett to try to get them to purchase Palmer as like a junior college thing. It doesn't go through, but those connections are strong. Another important sort of advocacy related, but also education related story is Dudley. Professor Dudley over at A&T is very much more concerned with making sure that Black men are safe and able to vote before being concerned with Black women in particular. And she's exchanging a lot of letters with him saying, no, all of us, not just one or the other. It doesn't have to be, it's an all of us scenario. We had the 3 Bs of education with her and Annie Burroughs and Mary McLeod Bethune, all working on their own schools and working together to put together these separate schools, but also trying to uplift them as much as possible, get fundraising as much as possible, advocate and market these schools as places for students to succeed. So there's a lot of these connections going forward. She's actively involved with the Greensboro Education Board to get certification for this school, because that takes a while and there's a lot of hoops to jump through in that same sense. There's a lot going on. I think for kids, when I'm trying to say that she just starts school, they don't really understand that that's the process of doing so, much less the process of doing something like that in like 1902, and the hoops that would need to be jumped through and the things that need to be taken care of. But there's a lot involved, and she's making a lot of connections with a lot of Black educators, local and nationwide, I'd say.
Okay, let's turn it to the alumni for a second.
Yeah.
I know that there's a strong alumni presence. And how did the lives and actions of these former students reflect the wonderful opportunity for personal education and growth? Did the alumni stay in North Carolina, or are they all over the country? And can you also speak to some of the alumni that we might be familiar with?
I wish I had a good name for one you're familiar with, so I apologize on that. But I do know that they're essentially everywhere. We have a very strong alumni association. Palmer Memorial Alumni Association are very well present and put together, and an important voice on our site when we're thinking about programming, thinking about preservation. And we were supposed to have their reunion last year, but because of the COVID restrictions, we were unable to. We're trying to work out a digital one to occur this year, and we're hoping that will go through. There's a lot of opportunity to keep them involved and keep them interested. Like the students, when they were coming, they're coming from all over and North Carolina, so they will go all over and North Carolina. So we have a lot of people who are from New York, who are in California, who are further in the West Coast and Midwest and Texas. There's a lot of, they basically went and scattered all over. Philadelphia is a name that's coming to mind right now. You know what, there's a video that I can share with you guys after, I believe, that is up from the alumni asking everyone to come for the reunion next year. It was something they released last year to tell everyone that we're not gonna be able to do it this year. We're very sad about it, but we're excited for when you guys come back next year, because we're gonna be able to really go forth and make some changes and really be involved in the site. I can share that with High Point Historical Society after this Zoom is over, and they'll be able to get more into it. I am unfortunate enough that I received this job during the pandemic and have not met much people in person, much less the alumni, but having talked to them on the phone and done Zoom meetings with them, they're excited, they're passionate, and they're very invested in seeing this site succeed in as many ways as we can make it succeed.
Well, thanks, Lacey. If you'll share that with us, we can then share it with everyone here today.
Absolutely.
So what about her connection to Maria Cole? Would you say that she is a famous alumni connection?
Yeah, we could, that's one that I often forget because they're related, so it doesn't usually stick in my mind, but absolutely. Dr. Brown doesn't have any children of her own, but does have nieces and nephews, and two musical ones, one being Maria Cole and the other being Carol Bryce. So Maria Cole is a niece of Dr. Brown, who grew up here, who went to school at Palmer, would go on to being involved in the Sedalia Singers and going on to a variety of musical education, and will play with the Duke Ellington Orchestra, where she, and her work there as well as a singer and pianist is going to be what brings her to her future husband, Mr. Nat King Cole, a very famous singer. And she will marry him, and they're pretty involved with the site, and it's in terms of they donated a lot of items to the site. When it was still a school, they would visit. If you go on our Facebook page, you'll see some students in a couple of our previous posts mention having met them when they visited the site. I know on their way to their honeymoon, they will stop by here as well. And we've got pictures of Nat and Maria at the piano in Canary Cottage, just playing it. It's really quite adorable. It's quite an amazing connection in terms of that. Thinking about jazz, it's like the popular music at the time. But in a similar vein, I like to uplift Carol Bryce as well, who is a famous opera singer, also a niece of Dr. Brown. Will go on to win an unpronounceable award to me off the top of my head, but it's like the Tonys of opera. And she will win that for, I believe, her work in Porgy and Bess, and be the first Black person to receive that award at that time. Very well known in that community as well. And we're working to uplift more of her stories within that time here at the site in terms of the arts education that occurred here. But yeah, those are two very famous graduates of Palmer. And I don't often think of them because I think of them as her nieces, but yeah, I should have brought them up.
Okay, and then are you offering any field trips, or what are your hours and your website, all that good fun stuff about that?
So the website, I'm sure will drop into the chat pretty soon, but definitely come and visit us. We are open we are open Tuesday through Saturday. We are giving outdoor campus tours from about at 10, 1, and 3 every day. If you arrive, come in the visitor center, one of us will meet and we'll be happy to take you along the tour outside. As I've mentioned, are some of our digital options right now as well. We've got a Canary Cottage tour that's up on our digital resources page on the website. We've got a campus one there. We've got our YouTube channel is pretty solid. There's some stuff to look at there as well. And we should have an exhibit up about the Palmer Memorial Building as well, done by a UNCG student. Please come by and visit us. We'd love to see you and love to talk to you more and getting more in depth about all the things that I just mentioned. In terms of field trips, that's something we'd love to have you contact us on in terms of figuring out how to best make that work for your education scenario, whether you have another organization, trying to keep numbers at a reasonable level, everyone masked up, and trying to give everyone the opportunity to learn more about this incredible site.
All right, thank you so much, Lacey. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Van.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lacey, for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you, audience, for your interest and support. How Did We Get Here educational series was presented by the High Point Historical Society and the High Point Museum. The High Point's Historical Society collects, preserves, and showcases the history of Greater High Point to foster a shared appreciation of our community that is reflected in the stories, events, and traditions of our past. We extend our invitation for you to join our organization. You can find membership information on the High Point Museum webpage, as well as information about upcoming programs. This program and other programs have been recorded, and the links can be found on the High Point Museum website or on their YouTube channel. Please stop by the High Point Museum and explore our history. And don't forget, stop by the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum and enjoy it, and visit Lacey. Lacey, thank you again for your presentation, and everybody have a wonderful day and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.